long before the world knew his name, before any flag bore his symbol, before the whispers of an empire spread across continents, there was a boy, not a prince, not a ruler, not even a soldier. His father, Osman Gazi, was a man of deep wisdom and unwavering integrity. He was respected by all, not because of how loud his voice was, but because of how gently he led. And his mother, Halim Hatton, was a woman of strength wrapped in grace, who would lead when danger came knocking. The elders began to notice something in Osman, not the eagerness of youth, but the patience of a leader. Son Ertugrul said, his voice firm but kind, leadership is not about being the loudest or the first to draw the sword. He wasn't born with a crown, he didn't inherit a kingdom, he inherited hope, a fragile but powerful thing. He saw a tree, mighty and tall, growing from his chest. Its branches spread far and wide, covering valleys, rivers, and cities. Beneath its shade, people of all colors and languages lived together in peace. He walked with a quiet confidence, not as someone who believed he was better, but as someone who believed he could serve. He helped the elders rebuild broken homes. He listened to the women when they voiced concerns. He played with the children and told them stories of courage and kindness, and all the while, he kept his dream close, like a compass guiding him through the unknown. The dream was both strange and beautiful, and when he awoke, he was trembling, not out of fear, but from the weight of what it might mean. Even within his own tribe, there were whispers that he was too young, too idealistic, that he lacked experience. But Osman did not argue. He simply kept working, and slowly, hearts began to change, because people don't follow the loudest voice. They follow the truest heart. Was it a sign? Was it a message from above? He didn't know, but he believed, and that hope lived in the eyes of the children of his tribe, in the weary smiles of their mothers, in the tired but trusting hands of the elders. The man listened and then looked deep into Osman's eyes. "My son," he said slowly, "what you saw is not just a dream. It is a seed of destiny, and you are the one chosen to plant it." Osman's heart beat louder. Could it be true? Was he meant for something greater? Not for pride or power, but for purpose. It was that hope that Osman vowed to protect. It is about being the first to forgive, the first to serve, and the last to give up. Osman listened not just with his ears, but with his soul. While others spoke, he listened. While others doubted, he believed. And when the tribe began to look for guidance, eyes turned not to the strongest, but to the most hopeful. And that was Osman. She prayed with her hands, but she healed with her heart. Together, they raised Osman with values that would someday shape the destiny of millions. But at that moment, Osman was just a curious boy, asking questions bigger than himself. Just a young boy named Osman, born in the quiet hills of Sogot, a place where the nights were lit only by stars, where the wind whispered through the trees, and where the future was still a mystery. Osman's childhood was filled not with gold or luxury, but with dreams. Dreams that he carried in his heart like treasures, dreams that seemed too big for his small world. He would often sit under the open sky, looking up at the vastness above, wondering what lay beyond the horizon. There were no maps in his hands, only questions in his soul. Why did people suffer? Why were some forced to live in fear? And could one person change the course of history? His home was simple, a tent made of leather, a tribe of proud and honorable people, and a family whose greatest wealth was their faith and unity. Mother Heb once asked as she folded a woolen cloth by the fire, "Do you think one day I'll be able to give our people a home of their own? A place where we can live without fear?" She smiled, the kind of smile only a mother can give, warm, full of belief. "My son," she said softly, "your dream is not too big. It is your heart that is big enough to carry it." That moment stayed with him forever. Osman did not receive an education in palaces or among scholars. His teachers were life, hardship, and the stories of his ancestors. Every evening, around the fire, elders would tell tales of justice, of honor, of the old times when people lived with dignity. He listened, his eyes wide, his heart absorbing every word. But he wasn't just fascinated by the past, he was imagining a future where justice was not just a story, but a reality, where people could walk freely, pray openly, and live with purpose. As he grew, so did his questions and his responsibilities. The tribe faced many struggles. They were surrounded by uncertainty. Who would protect them? He still remembered the words of his father one quiet evening, as they rode together on horseback through the plains. Yet leadership did not come overnight. It came with self-doubt, sleepless nights, and moments when Osman questioned whether he was worthy. Then came a night that would mark a turning point in his life, a dream. It wasn't just any dream. It was vivid, almost like a vision. He shared the dream with a wise spiritual guide, a man known for his humility and closeness to the divine. From that moment on, Osman changed, but not everyone saw his dream with the same light. Some feared it, some doubted it, and Osman's heart was true. As Osman stepped into manhood, the boy with big dreams slowly became a young leader with silent burdens. The innocence of childhood was fading, replaced by long nights of decision-making and the quiet heaviness of leadership. Though he had no throne, no riches, and no armies in glittering armor. Osman had something far more powerful, the trust of his people and a deep, unshakable faith in his purpose. But leadership is rarely easy, especially when you're walking a path no one has walked before. Bala Hatun, the daughter of a wise scholar, was unlike anyone Osman had ever met. She was graceful, but strong, kind, but firm. She saw Osman not as a boy chasing illusions, but as a man being pulled by purpose. There were times when food was scarce, when allies turned cold, when sickness spread, and faith wavered. Doubts were whispered. And one evening Bala came to him with concern. Under his guidance, the tribe grew stronger. He formed bonds with neighboring groups through honesty and respect, not through fear or force. He encouraged education and the sharing of knowledge. He planted trees where the land was dry, built homes where the earth was kind, and brought order where confusion had ruled. Slowly but surely, the vision was taking root. His people began to believe not just in him, but in themselves. They walked taller, spoke with more hope, and looked forward instead of back. "There are voices speaking against you," she said gently. He believed that the way of life his tribe was building, one based on faith, fairness, and family, was not just for them. It could be a way of life for many, perhaps for all. Not an empire of domination, but an empire of example. And Osman knew, deep in his heart, that the time was near. The time to step beyond the shadows of hesitation and into the light of action. Why can't the world be kinder? He once asked Bala, why can't people live under one shade, like the tree I saw in my dream? She touched his hand gently and replied, maybe because that tree was meant to be yours. To grow, to shelter, to protect. Osman looked out toward the mountains, his face calm. "Let them speak," he said. "We answer with action, not argument." That was Osman's way, never loud, never reactive. Always purposeful. Osman never claimed to have all the answers, but he never stopped showing up. Whether it was gathering stones to rebuild broken tents, sitting with grieving families, or lifting heavy burdens alongside his people, he led not from above, but from beside. The people began to see that Osman wasn't chasing power. He was building something deeper, a future. He no longer dreamed just for his tribe. He dreamed for the tired, the displaced, the unheard. He began to see leadership not as a position, but as a responsibility, to raise others, to bring balance, and to be a reflection of the mercy he had always believed in. His journey was not about taking, it was about giving. They met under unusual circumstances, in a village that had been affected by illness, where Bala was tending to the sick, while Osman had come to offer help and protection. In the midst of pain and suffering, they found each other, and as they spoke, their hearts began to understand each other in a language words could not fully express. "You carry so much in your heart," she said one evening. "Do you ever let yourself rest?" Osman looked down for a moment, then quietly said, "I rest in prayer." "And in your eyes," she smiled, and in that smile Osman felt the kind of peace that even 1,000 victories could not offer. For Osman, every step forward meant carrying the hope of many, the children who played barefoot on the dusty roads together. They dreamed, planned, and lifted one another through doubt. Bala often reminded Osman that even the strongest leaders need gentle hands and kind words. "You carry many people," she would whisper to him, "but don't forget to carry yourself too." And Osman would nod, reminded that strength was not just about endurance, it was also about tenderness. The elders who longed for peace in their final years, and the women who waited for their loved ones to return safely. He wasn't just leading a tribe, he was carrying a community's fragile dream on his back. The early years were filled with struggles, not against outsiders, but within. Change is never welcomed easily, and Osman's ideas were different. Still, the opposition weighed heavily on him. He would often retreat into the quiet of the night, away from the noise of the camp, and speak softly to the stars. "Am I being foolish?" he would ask in prayer. "Or is this dream truly from you?" And somehow, every time, the silence of the night would bring him a strange comfort, as if the sky itself was listening. He believed in growth, in building alliances, in moving beyond fear. Yet some within his own tribe saw his vision as a risk. His uncle Dunda Bey was among them, a respected elder who loved the tribe but feared the uncertainty of new paths. "We have survived this long by staying quiet, staying small," Dunda once said in a meeting of the elders. "Why chase dreams that could cost us everything?" Osman listened silently. He respected his uncle, but he could not ignore the fire within him, a fire that told him the tribe was meant for more than mere survival. "Uncle," he replied calmly, "the cost of dreaming is real, but the cost of fear is far greater. If we stay small forever, we will never be safe. We will never be free." His words were met with silence, but his eyes told a story no one could deny. A story of hope refusing to be buried. In those years of uncertainty, Osman found strength not only in his prayers but in love. A love that gave him courage, clarity, and calm. Their union was not just a marriage, it was a partnership of hearts, a joining of two souls who both longed for a world of compassion and justice. But the road ahead continued to be filled with obstacles. Still, some tensions could not be softened. His growing popularity unsettled. Others who had long held influence in the tribe, secret meetings were held, and his actions began to speak louder than any words. It was during this time that Osman began to dream even bigger. Her words became his fuel, and as his leadership matured, so did his vision. But the path forward would soon require greater sacrifices, harder decisions, and even deeper faith. The world outside their borders was changing. He was ready, not because he had everything, but because he had the one thing that mattered most: belief. Osman stood at the edge of everything he had ever known: the familiarity of his tribe, the simplicity of village life, and the quiet rhythm of a people surviving day to day. But in his heart, he carried something far greater than memory. Osman gathered his closest companions, men and women who had worked beside him, shared his sleepless nights, and helped raise the broken back to strength. "We are not starting a kingdom," he told them one evening under the stars. Together, they formed not just a political body, but a moral one. He didn't need to recruit with promises. His actions were enough. One afternoon, an elderly woman approached him with nothing but a bundle of herbs. "This is all I have," she said, "but I want you to have it because you've given us peace." Osman would smile and say, "Because I am not building for memory. I am building for meaning." That was the core of who he was. He didn't want statues or praise. He wanted progress, slow, steady, rooted in purpose. Osman knelt down, took her hand, and replied, "Every new village that joined them, every family that found safety, every scholar who came with knowledge, it all felt like another branch stretching upward." And in return, the world began to open up to his vision. Osman knew the journey was far from over, but he also knew the roots were strong. The empire was not built with force. It was built with care, careful planning, careful listening, careful building of trust. They had heard of Osman, a leader whose justice came with humility. Whenever praised, he redirected attention to his companions, to the wisdom of elders, to the prayers of mothers, to the courage of those who believed when nothing was guaranteed. And though much had changed, one thing remained the same: his wonder. He never let go of it. Despite all that he had accomplished, he continued to be amazed by the smallest things. A child's laugh, a new idea, a silent prayer, a blooming tree. These were, to him, the true signs of success, not how wide his borders were, but how deeply his people felt at home. He often said, "This is not my doing, this is our doing, and above all, it is grace." That humility became his armor. In a world that often confused strength with harshness, Osman showed that tenderness could be strong, that quiet could be powerful, and that love, yes, love could be the foundation of something lasting. They asked if he would help them rebuild their broken systems, offer them guidance, and allow them to live under his protection. Osman sat in silence for a moment, then replied, "We will not protect you. We will welcome you. You are not beneath us. You are us." That moment marked a shift, not in power, but in principle. Osman's tribe was no longer a circle of tents. It was becoming a circle of trust, stretching outward, inclusive, hopeful. "You've given me more than peace. You've given me strength." That simple exchange echoed through his camp and reminded everyone that in this new beginning, every soul mattered. Families began settling near his tribe, sharing their skills, teaching their values. There were those who sought to take advantage of Osman's generosity, who mistook kindness for weakness. But Osman had the wisdom to see through smiles and the humility to correct gently. He developed systems for fairness, a way for grievances to be heard, for decisions to be transparent, and for the community to function with dignity. These weren't just the early bones of governance, they were the seeds of a new way of living. Farmers, builders, educators, and poets brought with them not just tools, but traditions. Osman welcomed them all. He believed that diversity was not a threat but a gift, that a strong community was one that included many voices singing toward the same purpose. Osman didn't just want a land to rule. He wanted a society that lived with soul. He believed deeply that a future could only stand strong if it was built on principles. So he laid them down, gently but firmly. Truth would be honored, the poor would be protected, knowledge would be shared, and all faiths would be respected. In doing so, he began to create not only a home for his people, but an idea that would live long after he was gone. "We are building a future for those who will never meet us, but will walk in the world we leave behind." That single sentence became the heartbeat of everything they did next. It wasn't about monuments, it was about meaning. Osman understood something rare: that true leadership isn't marked by how high you stand, but by how many you lift as you rise. He carried a vision. It wasn't wrapped in maps or sealed in scrolls. It was stitched into the very fabric of his soul, a vision for a place where dignity would be inherited by all, where fairness would not be a reward but a right. And now, as the winds of change swept across the lands, that vision whispered more urgently than ever. It was time to act. The years of quietly building trust, planting hope, and walking beside his people had laid the foundation. Osman wasn't stepping into leadership. He was being called into it by the silent prayers of those who had believed in him, even when the future was unclear. There were no grand declarations, no golden crowns. Instead, there was purpose. The region was unstable, shaped by political uncertainty, shifting alliances, and constant fear. Many lived under the shadow of cruelty, unsure of who to trust or where to turn. Osman saw the gaps in the world, the spaces where justice had been forgotten, and decided to stand in them not with force, but with firmness. He started small, not with conquest, but with care. Where others demanded loyalty, Osman offered service. Where others ruled with fear, he inspired with compassion. People began to notice. Travelers passed through his region and spoke of a leader whose tent was always open, whose hands were always working, and whose eyes held a light that seemed to promise something better. He invited scholars, craftsmen, healers, and thinkers to join him not as subjects, but as partners. As more people came to him, not for shelter but for direction, Osman's movement began to grow. He didn't forget his early lessons. He still walked among his people. He still asked questions. He still listened. Still, growth brought challenges. Resources had to be shared. Disagreements had to be resolved. And not everyone who arrived came with good intentions. More than once, he was asked, "Why do you work so hard for people who may never remember your name?" There came a day when a nearby village, long neglected by their rulers, sent a messenger. He refused to take credit alone. In the evenings, he would still sit beneath the same sky he had stared at as a boy, and still, he dreamed. The tree from his vision continued to grow inside his heart. He had not taken anything from the world. He had given to it. As Osman's vision blossomed into reality, what emerged was more than a political movement. It was the shaping of an identity, not just for his tribe or his allies, but for a people still finding their name. Osman believed that when a person feels seen, heard, and safe, they begin to shine. He wanted his community to be one where every child knew their worth, every elder felt honored, and every stranger was welcomed with trust. The simplicity of his heart still echoed in his habits. He still rose before the sun, not for ceremony but for reflection. The crescent moon and star, which would later adorn flags and be etched in history, were more than designed to him. They represented balance. The moon, a reflection of light and darkness, and the star, a guide toward the future. He believed leadership should create more leaders, not followers. Young people who once felt invisible began to find their voice. Women whose wisdom was often ignored became advisors, teachers, and healers. Orphans found homes. Widows found dignity. Farmers found support. Osman didn't just preach compassion. He made it policy. He structured systems so that generosity wasn't optional, it was foundational. He never stopped reminding his people, and himself, that everything they had built was a gift, not a guarantee. That the true empire was not in land, but in love, not in monuments, but in meaning. And as long as those values stayed alive, so would his legacy. Long after his footsteps faded from the earth, his symbols weren't about rule. They were about remembrance, of values, of divine trust, of collective duty. Instead of turning him away, Osman sat beside him, listened to his music, and said, "You may think you're lost, but your melody belongs here." That boy was given a home, an education, and eventually became one of the community's most beloved musicians. And that was Osman's way. Not fixing people, but reminding them that they were never broken. Osman taught his people to see beyond themselves, to think not in days but in generations. It was a place where values came first and the rest followed naturally, where people felt safe to question, to learn, to try, to fail, and to grow. It didn't look like a traditional empire. There were no marble palaces, no armies and gold, but there was something stronger: peace, purpose, and a feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of world we were all meant to live in. He encouraged them to ask, how will the world remember us? Not as conquerors, but as caretakers. That humility never faded, not in wood and bark, but in hearts and hopes. Every new school, every open gate, every smiling child was a branch, and every person who lived with integrity was a leaf. The roots ran deep, and the fruits began to appear, not in gold or power, but in goodness. No matter how far his name reached, no matter how many lands aligned with his leadership, Osman remained rooted in the same soil where his dreams were born. That's why his roots were stronger than any storm. He still walked among his people barefoot at times, not as an act of humility for show, but because he wanted to feel the land with which his journey was intertwined. He still ate with the workers who built the walls, the mothers who baked bread, the young men who guarded the borders. His empire was not built with distance, it was built with nerve. This required more than policies, it required a heart-centered way of life. So Osman encouraged storytelling. Osman was not building a world that revolved around him. He was building one that could outlive him. He began training others, not just in leadership but in intention. One such night, a trusted friend asked, "Osman, do you ever feel fear that all of this could slip away?" Osman looked into the flames, quiet for a moment. Then he answered, "Every day. But fear is not my enemy." Forgetting why we started, that awareness kept him grounded. He never allowed comfort to dull his clarity. You can build with your hands, he told them, but what will last is what you build with your heart. He spoke often of legacy, not in terms of fame or power, but of impact. Long after I'm gone, he once said, no one will care how many lands we had. They'll remember whether their children felt safe, whether the poor were fed, whether we walked with justice. These weren't just words, they were guiding stars. He asked the elderly to share tales of old, not just battles, but lessons. He invited musicians to sing songs of unity and hope. He welcomed teachers to start small learning circles under the trees where children could read, write, and dream bigger than the skies above them. An empire, he once said, is only as strong as the kindness of its classrooms. The values he had planted with intention were now spreading, not through commands, but through culture. Disagreements didn't lead to division. They led to dialogue. A visitor from afar once observed how Osman handled a community issue, and later remarked, I have seen kings rule over cities with gold, but I have never seen a man rule hearts with such peace. Osman never claimed to have all the answers. He simply created the space for people to grow together, and in that soil, trust flourished. The people living under Osman's care began to adopt something beautiful and subtle, a shared way of being. It wasn't enforced. It grew naturally, as if something ancient was being reborn through the voice of one man's purpose. Osman often said, we are not just protecting lives, we are protecting what makes life worth living. This, to him, was the essence of leadership. And what was it that made life worth living? Faith, dignity, family, education, mercy, and perhaps most of all, he spent countless hours with thinkers and spiritual leaders, not to gain titles or theological depth, but to understand the soul of a just society. From the way people greeted one another to the way disputes were resolved, Osman's influence touched everything. And yet, as his reach expanded and more villages aligned themselves with his vision, Osman remained unchanged in his core. Still, he understood that leadership also meant preparing others. He even began shaping symbols that would carry meaning. At night around small fires, he would still speak with those closest to him, not about battle plans, but about dreams. Perhaps the most touching part of Osman's legacy was how he lifted others. One story that echoed for years was of a young boy named Yusuf, who had lost both parents and wandered into Osman's growing community with nothing but a broken flute. As the seasons passed, those around him began to realize what they were building was more than a settlement, and yet Osman never claimed the credit. This is not mine, he would say again and again. It is ours. And it is his. By now, the tree from his dream had become more than a symbol. It had become real. Osman often said, the day I begin to believe this empire is mine is the day I stop being worthy of leading it. As the years passed and Osman grew older, the signs of time gently began to show. The once restless boy who had stared at the stars with questions in his eyes was now a father, a guide, a symbol of hope for an entire people. His beard had turned silver, his steps were slower, but his vision, it had never been clearer. Every corner of his land, the children playing with laughter, the elderly walking without fear, the homes standing firm on foundations of peace, whispered back to him. It worked. My sons, the world will one day speak of us. My son, when you lead, lead as one who remembers where we began. They had come to him with broken pieces, and he had helped them believe again in purpose, in unity, in themselves. My brothers, he said, voice softer now, we started with nothing, not even a map, but we had trust, didn't we? We had each other, and we had him. They nodded, many now silently wiping tears. You are not followers, he continued. You are founders. Carry this light forward, not with swords, but with character. Generations later, as the Ottoman Empire expanded and its name reached across continents, people would still pause and ask, who was Osman Gazi really? A man who had no castle, but built a civilization. Maybe we need to sit under our own trees and remember that everything great once began small, that kindness is a strategy, that belief is a foundation, that service is the strongest form of leadership. A man who owned little, but gave everything. A man who dreamed not of control, but of care. The man who built an empire from nothing, because he started with the one thing that could never be taken away. And the answer would never be only about the lands he led or the cities he named. The answer was always in the values he lived, in the peace he nurtured, in the silent way he proved that greatness doesn't roar, it whispers, in hunger, in simplicity, in faith. Protect the weak, listen more than you speak, and let justice be your most loyal companion. The tent was quiet, but his words echoed as if the very fabric of the earth was listening. They may write stories, they may raise flags, but never forget, the real story is not in what we built, but how we treated people along the way. His voice trembled a little, but his spirit never did. Not written on paper, but engraved in memory. Build not for me. There was a softness in him, like a candle slowly preparing to dim after lighting so many others. And when the day finally came, a quiet morning, the sky soft with clouds. Osman Gazi left the world the way he had lived in it, peacefully, without noise, without fear. Build for the generations who will live in the shade of this tree we planted. Let them never feel alone. Let them say, we are safe because someone long ago believed in something good. Empires rise and fall. Cities turn to dust. But mercy lives forever. His dream, once only a flame in his heart, had found form in the hearts of others. Yet Osman, even in his last seasons, remained humble. He didn't walk with the pride of a ruler. He walked with the peace of a servant who had fulfilled his promise. The people could feel it. Osman was nearing the end of his earthly journey. There were no grand announcements, no throne speeches, just quiet moments, rich with reflection. He spent more time under trees, surrounded by the very soil that had once been walked by his ancestors. He visited families, spoke with children, listened to the poor, and spent time in silence, not out of loneliness, but reverence. Osman wasn't afraid. He had long made peace with life and death. For him, life was a trust, and death, a return. One evening he called his sons and closest companions to his tent. The sun was setting outside, painting the sky with hues of orange and gold. Inside, the light was soft, and the air carried a weight that everyone silently felt. Osman sat with his back resting against cushions, his face aged but still radiant. He smiled gently and gestured for them to sit. Come, he said, let us speak, not of war or borders, but of meaning. He began slowly, each word wrapped in the softness of wisdom. He looked at his eldest son Orhan, whose eyes were already moist. Then he turned to his companions, men who had walked with him through valleys of uncertainty. Some had once been shepherds, others orphans. That night, Osman gave them something more precious than a royal command. He gave them his final message. In the days that followed, Osman spent time with the earth, planting small trees, watching birds take flight, and smiling at the simple rhythms of life. But his presence did not leave. In fact, it became stronger. His sons continued his mission with care and wisdom. His people spoke of him not as a king, but as a father. To this day, in old books, in songs passed down by elders, and in quiet corners of history, Osman's essence lives on. And maybe that's what we need to remember. In our world today, where noise often drowns meaning, and speed often outruns purpose. Because in the end, Osman's legacy isn't just a part of history. It's a quiet invitation to us all, to build with belief, to live with legacy in our hearts,